Over 190 countries came together at the United Nations to negotiate a historic global ocean treaty that could help protect at least 30% of our seas by 2030. I have invited Dima Litvinov, senior campaigner at Greenpeace, to explain what a global ocean treaty is, why it is important, and how it could affect the seabed mining and fishing industry. Stay tuned. Welcome to the studio, Dima.
Thank you.
I'm pretty sure that most people have heard about the Paris Agreement, but I'm not sure if as many people know what the Global Ocean Treaty is. And that is why I have invited you today to talk more about this. So first of all, what is the Global Ocean Treaty and why is it important?
No, you're absolutely right, Kajsa. I think that it's one of the best kept secrets. And it's funny because this is probably the most important environmental governance agreement that is being negotiated right now. But we should start at the beginning, yes, which is what's happening at sea. And basically, it's clear that life at sea is under very heavy pressure, under very heavy threat. There was a report that released just about a month ago by the International Panel on Biodiversity and Ecological Services. That's very scary reading. I mean, basically about a third of all of the vertebrate species at sea are threatened. About half of all the coral reefs are dead at this point. There are 500 dead zones, that is areas where no life can be supported throughout world's oceans. And clearly this is a result of human activities, right? Human activities both at sea, such as fishing, such as oil drilling, and now an emerging threat of deep sea mining, but also just general destruction of global environment from all sources. So it's large-scale contamination by plastic, by industrial effluent, and of course climate change. So this combination of pressures has led to this very sad situation.
It sounds like it's almost too late.
Well, no, it's not though, because marine life is quite resilient. It is capable of coming back, but then conditions have to be in place for it before it's too late.
Yes.
Because we are not quite there yet, but if it continues on this trajectory, we'll get there. And this is where the whole idea of marine reserves comes in. It's just as on land, you know, if you want to protect biodiversity, if you want to protect life in the forest, you want to put aside some parts of it.
Like a national park. Like
a national park, or some sort of a reserve, something that's basically off limits for human use. And if you protect some part of it, then the rest of the forest is open for human use as long as it's done sustainably. And the same thing is true for the seas. So there's a strong consensus on the part of marine scientists that what is needed is a large network of these marine sanctuaries, these marine reserves that cover pretty much the whole ocean, probably up to about 30%. And then the other 70% of the ocean would be available for sustainable use, continued use.
Fishing and mining and such.
Exactly, and other extractive activities and other types of human use. So that is well established, that is well known, that is even encoded in a number of international agreements, such as the Convention on Biological Diversity. There are some intergovernmental organizations that have signed on to this, such as the International Union for Conservation of Nature, that Sweden is also a signatory to. So we know what the solution is. We know what is needed. That's good news, right?
And we all signed the...
We absolutely, we've signed on to the fact that we need this, right? So, but that is the ambition, and there's an understanding that that's needed.
Yes.
However, the reality has not caught up with the science, right? So we know we need about 30% protected, but in reality, less than 1% of international waters is protected today. About 0.8%. There's a very big gap. And that is, the question is why? If we know what needs to happen, why does it not happen? And the reason for that is that there is real lawlessness out in international waters. Basically, the waters of the ocean are divided into three basic segments. There's, legally speaking, there's the area right along the coast, about 12 sea miles, that is national waters, territorial waters.
Belongs. So, this is Swedish water.
Exactly.
This is
This is Russian. This is Norwegian. This is whatever. So what the 12 miles is the national laws and rules that apply, and then 200 sea miles from there It's the so-called exclusive economic zone.
Okay.
So it's basically economic activities that are regulated, such as fishing. So that's still regulated in there. But, for example, environmental laws no longer apply in that area.
Okay.
And then when you go further afield, outside of the 200 miles, you get to real high seas. And there it is only the United Nations General Assembly that decides on the rules.
Is that where the deep sea bed mining is taking place?
That's primarily, that is the area where the deep sea mining is looking into expanding. There are also areas within the economic zones,
okay.
But the largest areas that are of interest in the future are in the international waters. So how are these waters regulated, the international waters? There is a United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. That's kind of the constitution for how humans are allowed and are supposed to behave out in international waters. But that is quite general law, right? Okay. So under that, there's a number of implementing agreements that make more specific regulations. Now, these regulations exist for a number of sectors. So, for example, for shipping. For international shipping, there are a number of laws and regulations, and there is a special body that is created to make sure that these are followed. It's called the International Maritime Organization. So that's fine. There are regulations that are applicable to that sector. Similarly, for fisheries, there are a number of implementing agreements, and there are some bodies that they don't cover the whole international waters, but some of them are so-called regional fisheries management organizations. Now, of course, regional fisheries management organizations that are interested in one issue, and that is maximizing the amount of product that can be taken by the member states' fishing fleets. Similarly, the interest of the shipping industry is represented by International Maritime Organization. For deep sea mining, there is another body and set of laws, which is the International Seabed Authority, and that's fine. However, what is missing is any sort of rule and any sort of organization that is responsible for biodiversity.
That regulates all of this.
Exactly. That regulates, well, that regulates life at sea.
Oh, yeah.
So if I would make a comparison with a national regulation, say in Sweden we have the constitution, and then there is the fisheries law and the fisheries authority. There is, say, the mineral law and the mineral authority. But if there were no environmental law, no Ministry of Environment, no Nature Protection Authority, no EPA, then you don't have the tools.
They wouldn't care about the environment, because they do care, but they want to get as much as they can. Well,
it's not exactly. It's not their primary purpose. It's not their mandate to protect life. Their mandate is to make sure that there's enough product that is being produced for their segment. It's perfectly reasonable. So, but this lack of regulation is something that is not something that just esoteric issue that Greenpeace suddenly found out, right? Now, this is something that has been well understood by the United Nations and by other players involved. So the UN has started a process of putting into place a new implementing agreement, specifically for the purpose of regulating biodiversity, of protecting biodiversity and life at sea. So that was there was a great celebration when that process was actually started. So as of 2 years ago, a negotiation process is underway within the UN for this implementing agreement under UNCLOS for the protection and sustainable use of marine biodiversity beyond the boundaries of national jurisdiction, BB&J. It's quite a heavy acronym, quite a mouthful, and it's and coming back to what you said in the beginning, Kaisa, you're exactly right that everyone has heard of the Paris Agreement.
Yes.
And very few people have heard about this process, but in reality, it's just as important. This is the Paris Agreement for the seas.
Yeah. So recently, delegates from the United Nations met for, I think, the third time, and so the treaty is supposed to be completed by 2020.
That's right.
And in March, they're having the fourth talk.
March or April. They haven't said the date exactly, but during the spring,
So what's the response been like? Are most countries in favor of this, or?
This is something that we were not particularly surprised by when we saw this, but that there are definitely interests that are being represented by a number of countries that do not want to see this change. They do not want to see the stronger regulation.
Which countries are these?
Well, there are, in particular, Norway and Iceland are of quite big relevance for us, I think, because the governments there are wary of any sort of regulation that may impact on the abilities of the fleets to operate. They have a huge
fishing industry as well.
They have a huge fishing industry and a huge offshore fishing industry. So there's a concern from there. There are some countries such as Russia for whom it's more of a geopolitical issue, I think. They don't want regulation of anything that has to do with what they perceive to be their national interests. And then there are some sectoral interests that are also represented within, or that are quite vociferous within the negotiations, that are a little bit more difficult to discern, and yet they're there, that they're in opposition to that. So the argument that you will hear a lot is that there's no need to change the system. What we need to do is we need to put into place some principles, and then the existing institutions will implement them. That is unfortunately a fake argument, because we have now seen that despite numerous attempts, existing institutions just are not capable of doing that.
What does Sweden say?
Well, and Sweden has been very quiet, very passive in these negotiations, very passive. But if you look at the very few official documents that are coming out from the government, it's quite concerning, to be honest. It seems that the ambition that the Swedish government has put forth is not so much for the protection of biodiversity, but rather that this process does not rock the boat, that it does not in any way decrease the mandate of existing organizations. So they're also promoting more status quo rather than the needed change.
Okay. But I know that Greenpeace, obviously, you guys are trying to commit to, or you want a strong global ocean treaty.
Absolutely, I think that it's not only us, and it's not it's not only the NGO community.
Is there a difference between a global ocean treaty and a strong global ocean treaty?
Absolutely, there are a number of different. Some oceans treaty will come out from this process. That's doubtless. But I mean, there are basically three different possibilities. The strong ocean treaty that you're talking about would put into place a new institutional structure, new set of international organs. So it would be like a conference of parties, which has a strong mandate to make a decision and represents every single government in the world. It would also have a standing secretariat that would be doing work on establishing marine reserves and designating them and doing the science. There'd be a scientific committee that is also established. And then these bodies would in a strong treaty version, would have the right, the responsibility, and the mandate to identify, to create, and to put in the measures for this network of marine reserves around the world. Then there is the status quo, which is basically, well...
Nothing really changes.
Nothing really changes. That treaty will just embody some principles, such as, good environment is good, bad environment is bad. Yeah, exactly. Let's try for the good kind of thing. And then sort of leave it back to the existing institutions. Then there's some sort of a hybrid version where...
is that the worst case scenario then? The status quo?
Absolutely, and knock on wood, but hopefully this is not something that will come out from these negotiations. But the hybrid version, unfortunately, is not really the solution we need either. The kind of versions that are being discussed is a situation where an institutional framework is established, but it's toothless. It doesn't have the mandate to act. So you will have the COP, you will have some sort of standing secretariat, but they will not have the right to put into place measures.
Penalties and such.
Well, not only that, but even rules of behavior. So they'll say, okay, well, this area ought to be a marine reserve. Now, you guys in the existing institutions go and fill this with content. And again, this will not happen, as we have seen again and again. Despite attempts, it just does not happen without true international global effort.
Okay, but I'm also guessing that the fishing industry, so the industries operating in the oceans, the fishing industry and the seabed mining industry, are they quite hesitant? Have they tried to lobby against?
Well, it's interesting. I think that the more progressive elements of the fishing industry realize that they stand to benefit quite a lot by a strong treaty.
How?
There was, in fact, the idea of marine reserves, while it seems almost counterintuitive, but it's something that a number of fishing companies in the world would like to see more of. And it's clear why, because science is showing that by protecting a part of the marine ecosystem, you actually increase the ability of fish populations to reproduce and to grow, and therefore there's more of a product for the fishing industry. So it was interesting that the Norwegian Fishing Association a few years ago has complained that the government of Norway did not put into place a sufficiently strong and large network of marine reserves inside Norwegian waters.
Okay.
So from that perspective, I think we can expect that certainly some parts of the fishing industry will not only not oppose, but will support a stronger treaty. There is also another aspect, which is that the fishing industry is not homogeneous. I mean, as no sector is, of course. And there are fishing companies that are more interested in providing a sustainable product for the customers. And those companies would certainly stand to gain quite a lot by having an even playing field where they do not have to compete against perhaps less principled companies that are willing to take their product in a less sustainable way. So they would want to have a stronger regulation.
Come up with sustainable alternatives, such as Beyond Meat, for example. That share just skyrocketed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, because there is clearly a demand from the consumers.
In what ways could the world, or specifically the economy, benefit from a strong global ocean treaty?
Well, I think in the end, the oceans that are healthy oceans, they're important, well, certainly for life in the ocean, but they're also important for as regulators of climate as well. So one aspect I think that's quite important is that healthy climate is important. You cannot have healthy business climate in a sick global climate, right?
No.
So in general, sustainability is something that I think is a prerequisite.
Yeah, the only way forward, kind of.
Exactly. There is no good business on a dead planet, right?
No.
That's first of all. And second of all, that is, I think, there's a rapidly growing realization of the effect that consumer action has on the environment, both at sea as well as in other parts of our planet. And so there's a rapidly growing demand for more sustainable products and a much more educated consumer. I think that it's much more difficult these days for companies to sort of just give mouth to the fact that they're clean and green, while in reality continuing business as usual. We see that, and particularly clearly with fishing products, where companies that have painted themselves as sustainable, and in reality we're not able to maintain that charade.
Yeah. Customers are actually aware, and they're
aware,
demanding.
exactly, and they know where to find that information, and they're just becoming more savvy in seeing through greenwash.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming to the studio today. It was really interesting to talk to you, and I wish you all the best.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much, Kaisa.
Thank you.